Hello, everybody. My name is Sarah Bryden. I am the chair of the Portland, Maine Board of Education Finance, Operations, and Personnel Committee. We are having our committee meeting today, October 21. It is 6:02 p.m. and we are going to get started. We have with us, we have committee member, board member Opperman. We have committee member, board member Noor, and then we have Board Chair Lentz with us as well. We have Superintendent Scallon, we have Dr. Warren, we have Helene DeBartolomeo and Jennifer Slaybank. I think that, yes, I've gotten all the squares. So let's get started. We are going to talk about a number of things today. We're going to talk about year-to-date financials, an update on Maine Care reimbursement and HR processes. So lots to cover. And right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to check and see if we have anybody who might want to give public comment, because if we do, I will go over our public comment guidelines. I am not seeing anybody that would like to give public comment. I will give it a minute. All right, so I'm going to close public comment. All right. So I think in terms of the agenda, the first item is year-to-date financials in terms of an update. Is that correct?
That's correct. And we'll have our Senior Executive Director of Finance, Helene DeBartolomeo, share that.
Super. Thank you so much.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good evening. So today I wanted to share with you the financials year to date through September 2024. It's our first quarter financials for this fiscal year. What I put in front of you is what I try to do is I try to provide you what the board approved back in April and compared that by fund on the revenues here. So three months into the quarter, into the year, we should be at about 25%. These are our revenue collections. So as you can see with our general fund, we're at 24%. Some of our funds are over and under, and that would be our other funds, and that would be due to us having revenue collections from the prior year that we collected that we did not go ahead and book that in the previous year. So we are showing the collection and earnings in this fiscal year. So year to date, as far as where we are today through September, we're 23% collected on our revenues. I also provided down below some budget amendments against the approved budget. So our CTE program, we had originally budgeted about $299,000, and that there was an adjustment from the state. So I had showing a revenue adjustment to our budget, reducing the revenue budget by $87,000 to match what the state is planning to provide us. And then we also received a Preventing Homeless grant that we did not originally book. When we started the year, this came in just a couple of months ago. So I'm also showing that revenue, and so this will show us what our now revised budget will look like going into this fiscal year. So our budget went up on our revenues, and here I'm showing by fund what those revenue collections are as well. So on the other side, we also are showing our expenses. Again, we're showing you through the approved budget of the $161.4 million and what we've spent today through September. Our expenses are actually running on the low side, which is a good thing. We're not overspending on any of the categories or concerned about any overspending. And then again, below that line, I'm showing you the other side of the budget amendment that has to be done for the CTE in order to maintain balance on our budget. Reducing the expense budget as well by the $87,000, and then increasing the expenses for the Preventing Homeless grant. I also had to roll some budget forward from previous years. So this was funding that we received from grants. Most of them are from private grants. So we already received the revenues for it. But in order to make sure we spend all the money that we received, I have to go ahead and provide the expense budget for the different departments so they can continue utilizing the grant. And then there was a small roll forward for the homeless children and youth grant from last year that needed to be finished being spent down. And so, as you can see, we increased the expense budget by about $411,000. But you can see overall, all of our expense year to date are either in line with what we're expecting, where we should be this time of the year, or lower, actually. So here I'm providing you a breakdown of just the general fund. What I wanted to show you is a breakdown. So if you look here, our general fund expenses year to date was $28.28 million. So now what I'm trying to do is break it down by category. So you have a little bit more insight to what those expenses look like and where we're actually running on our expenses. Our personnel includes salaries and benefits, and our contracted services include either purchase services or utilities. And as you can see, the only budget that's running a little high is supplies, but that's expected, whereas schools are buying and purchasing their supplies ahead of the school year instead of during the school year. And all the other budgets are still below the expected for this time of the year. So this is where we're actually wanted to have some conversation about what was happening with the need to be able to bring in a contract for $500,000. So what I did is I provided you the budget by state categorical, which is what is required by the state statute in order for us to show whether or not we exceed that 5% threshold or not. So as you can see here in our regular instruction, we're planning to take $350,000 from that category and move it into the system admin category, which is where we would pay that expense out of. And also in there, you don't see it, but there's about another 150. I'll give you the detail on the next line. But I just wanted to provide you the year-to-date actual based on adjusting our budget. By reducing it to 350, you'll see that reducing it only brings us to a 0.6% adjustment overall to the category. And we're still, when we look at our year-to-date actuals, you'll see that we're still in line with where we should be in first quarter for the fiscal year. So some context to that information that I just showed you. So the strategy behind what the plan is that, so we have about $150,000 in savings in our system administration category as it is. $100,000 is savings from the contract with Attuned. We were able to secure that funding through a grant. So there's cost savings there. We were also planning, we had budgeted originally $50,000 to contract for the high school for the future application process. And that, again, that was also secured with the grant. And so these are both budget savings that we're seeing of $150,000. And then the remaining $350,000 would come from the regular instruction. And so I did some analysis and reviewed where we are as far as salaries and benefits. And we are seeing that we have some savings through vacancies because we're, backfilling those with either temp or substitute positions, which overall will provide us a cost savings to the general fund. And we're also seeing that, as you remember, when we originally budgeted the general fund, we based it on average pay. And so when we looked at average pay, we were looking at where everybody was in FY24. So since then, we've actually had some attrition to those positions, to a lot of positions, especially teacher positions. So when we actually brought in and reviewed what we were looking like, doing some analysis based on actual, we're seeing a cost savings as well when it comes to looking at the difference between what we were averaging on salaries and what we actually came in with on actuals. So with those 2 items or 3 items, we are able to maintain the funding on the instructional level while also being able to transfer our budget in order to bring in that contract for $500,000.
Let me know when you are at a point where it makes sense for questions.
I would say now.
Okay, super. So as always, I was just going to say, raise a Zoom hand. Board Member Opperman, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Helene. It was really clear. I appreciate that a lot. I had a couple questions. That those grants that are listed, the changing of the budget, are those Portland Adult Ed grants, or are they just general grants for the K-12 system? The ones that were like
the roll forward ones you're looking at? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Yes.
Yeah, the roll forward ones were private grants that we had.
And where do they go to?
They're various grants.
Okay.
There were a lot of little small grants that had to, that weren't finished being spent down in 24.
Yep. On the average versus actual salaries, which is great, is that accounting for the recently
12%? The
new ed tech one? Is that?
Yes, I did take that into consideration as well. Yes.
Fantastic. So that's all. So when we're looking at that line in the regular instruction, it actually, the spent does that include what will be the back pay through September, or is it?
Not yet, but since we have September in there, I was able to calculate what it would look like when we do the retro.
Excellent. Thank you. And the one on the figuring out where we get $500,000 from, there on that screen, there's the 6. Okay, so my understanding is that we don't upset or remove more than 5% from any state category. That's the threshold?
That's the threshold.
And it doesn't matter, though, that we increase another area more than 5%.
Correct. It's where you're taking it from.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's why I was showing you here that we're way below that threshold.
Yeah. Well, I just saw the 6.2 and I said, okay, what's that mean and all? Yep. That's all I had. Thanks.
Thank you, Board Member Opperman. And just to make sure that, if anybody watches the recording later, if any members of the community were at that business meeting on the 15th, and I just want to put some puzzle pieces together and draw a more direct line between some stuff. I just want to confirm that what we're talking about is the Barry Dunn contract that will cost about $500,000. And in the business meeting, it was a discussion of a few different possible strategies to do that. And I think what I'm hearing here is that where we've landed is what you just described. Helene, is that correct?
That's correct. That was the explanation was to provide reasonable assurance that we would be able to take on that contract without taking away from any funding from any particular place and create some type of be in a place where at the end of the year we don't have enough funding.
Right. I appreciate that. And also to confirm, because We are not at that 5% threshold. This is a board awareness thing rather than something that the board needs to vote on, correct?
Correct.
Okay, super. All right, and it looks like board member Figdor has joined us as well. I didn't see that until you stopped sharing your screen. So I have another question.
Chair Bryden, can I just add one piece for just
Yes.
like super clarity?
Yes.
So when we talked on the 15th, because Helene's 100% right on this, right? That on the 15th, we talked about there being a couple of options. They were each threshold options,
Okay.
right? So if you couldn't absorb it in the budget, what action was necessary? If it would push you above 5%, what action was necessary? And it was my own fault for just not being clear enough and just learning it as still new enough to Maine that this was a learning for me in terms of the process. What I've learned in this process is that as long as the movement of funds is less than 5%, it is an action that we can do. It will eventually require board action just at the year-end closing, right? So when we get the final financials, we will ask you to approve the final, but it does not require it at this point, but we'll just ask for it at the very end. If we were to, on the flip side, go above 5%, it would require further action. But because it's under 5, it only requires board action. It doesn't require other bodies.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. And also, Helene, I'm so sorry. I didn't start out with thank you for that really clear, detailed information. I should have led with that. I have one more question, and it's not a Helene question, but I wanted to ask, so the savings that are a result of vacancies. I just wanted to get a few quick thoughts on what that means in terms of providing what we need to provide to students. If there's that much savings, do we have the staff that we need to do what our students need? And I'm not sure who in this call is the best person to address that, but a couple of sentences on that would be really helpful.
Yeah, so I'm happy to take that. So this was the first time that we could really get a true snapshot on exactly where we sat financially. So we know that we have vacancies, and we know that when we went through with the budget process, we proposed to you the staffing that we thought we needed to serve students. And so any vacancy, right, is one that we want to be filling. And so we are going to sit down with our assistant superintendents and our principals and just talk about how we can potentially leverage some of the savings and still operate within our budget to serve students. And so we've already started to have some of those conversations. And so you may see that we are going to try to strategically add a couple of ed techs. The truth is that we still have ed tech vacancies. And so that's easier said than done. We may look at a couple of other positions and talking to principals. The hard part is that it's going to be about filling the positions. And so we're going to sit down with our principals and talk about what are not just positions that we should be listing, but also that we could fill or other creative options that they may think about.
I guess the other way of saying what my question was, we may have experienced some savings from the start of the year till now because there are vacancies, but we should not expect financially to be running continued savings because we're going to be filling some of those roles, correct?
That's the hope,
Okay.
Right? Also, the hope is that the ed tech contract that we just recently signed will result in some of those positions getting filled.
Yep.
Right? Because of its competitive nature. So that's our hope. And that we'll see better fill rates for substitutes because of the direct link between the contract and sub rates. And so that's the hope.
Okay.
It's still too early to see.
Understood. Thank you so much for that additional context. I appreciate it. Other questions before we move on? Okay. Onward.
Okay, I'm going to go, and I guess this is Sarah, Dr. Warren.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. This is just a one-slide update, and I will say this is very early days, so I hope that in another couple of months we'll have a fair amount more detail to share. But we just wanted to give you a quick update on where we're at in terms of our efforts to recoup more funding from Maine Care. And at least in this year to hit the target that the board set of $300,000 in revenue. So this lies within our student services team under Jesse Applegate's direction. We think that we're on track at this stage to hit either the 300,000 or relatively close to it. At the moment, our current billing that we've brought in since the start of the fiscal year, which includes our summer ESY programming, and then about half of September, would take us to around $40,000. So this is all being led and coordinated by Patty Dyer, who again sits within special education and student support services. She's got a huge amount of experience managing special education grants. She wasn't doing the Maine Care work last year or over the last couple of years, but she's done a lot of it in the past. And one of the things that I loved about Patty when we sat down to interview her for this position was that she was excited about it and thought that we could do it. So she has a really great can-do attitude and has just really been diving into it and figuring it out where we're at now and where we need to go. So based on that work that she's been doing, we've sort of set 3 priorities in order. So the first one is just to clean up the whole process and system now to make sure that we've got the right structures and procedures in place to allow us to maximize our revenue. And the lowest hanging fruit there was to do occupational, physical, and speech therapy billing, which is already taking place. But we can see that there are a number of areas where we can strengthen that effort to bring in more funding. So Patty has both been reviewing old documents, cleaning things up, putting in new billing for things that hadn't been caught before. And then also she has just recently completed a training with all of those folks, occupational, physical, and speech therapists, to remind them of how this process should work. Or for the folks that are newer, I think it was probably a more of an initial training. From there, we will move on to working with our psychologists to make sure that we're getting the billing together for them and that we're recouping all of that money. And then the third stage, once we're fairly confident in our systems and we're working well with those groups of folks, will be to add in some of the social work services. So it won't include everything that we do as social work under the state law and the Maine Care procedures. Day treatment, which has its own sort of definition. Students that are getting, that could be classified as receiving day treatment services can be billed to Maine Care. So we'll be working on figuring out how to do that with some of our social workers, but that is sort of stage 3 of this initiative. And I will open it up for questions if you have any.
Board Member Victor, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Dr. Warren. I'm thrilled to see this work progress, and it looks like we have a great hire and are making some real progress. So kudos to you and the team. My question is about the state process, and my understanding was the state was working to simplify the process to make it less onerous to apply for and receive Maine Care reimbursement. And so I'm wondering what the status of that is.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for you right now. I'm happy to come back to you on that to find out from Patty more how she feels like that's affected the work for her and the therapists that are charging. I will say that just based on my conversations with her, it's still a fairly complex effort, just in terms of making sure that we have, parental consent in place, that we've got folks filling out the right forms, submitting them on time, and then it all has to be reviewed and turned around and sent in. So it may be that the new process is easier than the old process, but I will say it's still fairly complex and time consuming. But I'll ask Patty if she could give us a little bit more of an update on how she's experiencing that shift, if she's feeling it.
Great, thank you. And maybe it will make our processes, able to be more streamlined moving forward.
Yeah.
And then I had a quick question. Again, thank you, Dr. Warren. This is a really good update. I'm so pleased to hear all of this. My question has to do with, to sort of tie this in with some conversations that we've had in other meetings. I think I might be the person who's like most excited in a lot of these conversations about the SOPs that you've put so much time and energy into. So I'm curious about whether the processes that Patty is cleaning up and documenting, is that going into the SOP universe?
Yes, you're singing my song. So yeah, just a few days ago, I confirmed that with her, that not only is she cleaning up the systems, but that she's documenting it. And, we want to make sure that we always have, one, that things are codified in writing so that everybody knows what's happening, but also, that it doesn't all just sit with Patty and her knowledge and skills, but that if we needed to have someone else step in and lead this, that they could easily do it with what she's put down in writing. So absolutely, that is the goal. And that's one of the reasons why, as she's working on cleaning things up right now and getting the OT and the physical therapy and speech therapy stuff done as well as possible, that we're kind of holding on that a little bit so that we can make sure that all the processes are documented and in place, so that when we move to the psychologists, we're building off of a strong base and staying consistent with how we're doing all the work.
Yeah. By the time you get to the social workers, it will be like,
it'll be easy, right?
Yeah, seamless.
No problem.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that information. Other questions before we continue? Okay, seeing none, let's forge ahead.
Up is Jennifer Slavink from HR.
Thank you. Okay, so I have a lot to say with just the first slide. So Helene, I'll kind of give you the heads up when I'm ready to move on to the next one. So I'm actually really excited to share with you tonight because the data that I'm going to highlight represents a significant amount of work from the HR team. And it's data that I feel like is accurate and comprehensive, and it gives me, as the director of HR, a stronger sense of our staff, our compliance needs, and our path forward in HR. So I say all of that, while also acknowledging that there continues to be work to be done. I want to express that we have a continued commitment on behalf of the HR team around this work. And I want to explicitly thank Mano Ali, Izzy Diamond, and Aaron Tosi for their significant amount of work around this data to ensure that what I am presenting to you and ultimately what we send to the state is a true and accurate reflection of the work our staff is doing every day. I also want to shout out Beth Linovich, who has been an excellent resource and an ally in reviewing certifications and supporting staff who are in the process of obtaining their certifications. So I have two related yet distinct things that I wanted to share this evening. The first is an update regarding NEO, which someone had asked what that acronym is. I still don't know. We still haven't determined the meaning, so we're just going to continue to affectionately refer to it as NEO. This is data that we provide to the state for all of our employees, teachers, administrators, ed techs, custodians, food service workers, clerical staff, sports coaches, anyone, you name it. And we can glean quite a bit from this report. In HR, we are mostly concerned with certifications and any possible misalignments, as well as the CHRC data. And we're going to talk a little bit about both of those things here. It's important to share that at the time of creating these slides, we had 1,589 staff entered into NEO. These are current employees, meaning that they are in some sort of position that receives compensation. So again, teachers, yes, but also someone who may coach 6 weeks of a fall sport. Over the last 6 weeks, the journalists have worked to ensure that the data in our fiscal year 2025 staffing report matches what we have entered into our payroll system, ADP, and matches what we have in NEO. So we've really wanted to make sure that there was alignment across all of those systems. part of this process included identification of over 200 staff listed in NEO who no longer work for Portland Public Schools. And so those have been purged from the system. Since July 1st, the HR team has added over 400 new hires into that NEO system. And in reviewing the data across these different data sources, the fiscal year spreadsheet, the ADP data, and NEO, we were also able to identify almost 150 staff that, for whatever reason, had never been entered into NEO in previous years upon hire. And so those staff were also added into NEO at this time so that we have all of our data aligning and being updated. So then with regard to certification status, our team is finalizing our review of any potential violations and ensuring that we have plans in place to appropriately support those staff in meeting their timelines for certification completion. And we'll be able to present a little bit more at the November board meeting around that. That report is due October 31st. So we're still trying to kind of sort through a couple of cases and just make sure everyone's on track. We have a lot of applications in for certifications, but the Department of Education doesn't always have them done by October 31st. So we may have a couple of things that look like violations, even though we know everything's in place for those folks. Other examples around certification where we anticipate potentially seeing some violations are around special ed staffing, staff who maybe have a certification that doesn't quite align with what they're currently teaching. For example, a gen ed certification now supporting by teaching special ed, or someone with an elementary certification, but they've moved to secondary because they have some sort of a focus area and they may need a class or two to finish up that, let's say, a secondary social studies certification. So they have that certification in hand. It just may not be completely a match with where they're teaching at the moment. So I should have already said, instead of it saying moving forward at the bottom, I should have said what we're already doing. We are generating monthly reports so that we can continue to monitor the NEO data, ensure we don't have any gaps in our reporting, catch any errors early, ensure that we're working with the staff in our equity team, Barrett, Tyler, Julia, and Beth, to formulate growth plans for folks who need that, who maybe want to either need to do some work to finish their certification or want to move up. For example, an ed tech who wants to move from an ed tech 2 to an ed tech 3, providing that support to get those folks what they need to be able to move forward in their professional growth and their careers. So that's a whole bunch about NEO. And then the next slide is around our CHRCs. So the good news around this data is it's more complete, right? When I shared earlier, there were nearly 150 employees not in NEO. We found these people now, right? So there's no more falling through the cracks. We found them. We can review their status. And it's our first time reaching out to these employees. So we've given them until October 31st to obtain their clearance. And with that, I would say they've been extremely responsive in working to get into compliance. It's also important to note that many of these individuals turned out to actually have already had a CHRC when they came to work for Portland, but because they weren't in NEO, we wouldn't have known that they were expiring. And so now we know, right? Now we've gotten that notification. And we know this because when they've gone to apply for their CHRC renewal, the Department of Ed has just said, well, we just need a letter confirming that you've been in continuous employment with Portland Public Schools. And so we've been able to generate some letters of verification in the past few days, which will help. So they don't have to go out. A new CHRC would require all the fingerprinting and all of that. So those people, they've already got fingerprinting done and a CHRC attached somewhere. It's just kind of fallen off along the way. So they're renewing those now. And that number sits at 41, but I will point out it does include, for example, teachers who have been confirmed as being eligible for a conditional certification, and they're just waiting for that processing timeline through the Department of Ed. But we can't see that in the file without sort of saying to them, we don't see it, and then they provide us. So I had someone today who provided me with, and is actually still reflected in that 41, who provided me with all the applications she submitted to the Department of Ed. And I said, if you could just apply for your CHRC, that'll come in 2 or 3 days and it'll make me feel better. And she's already done it because she really felt strongly that she doesn't want to be one of the people who's on the list. So that being said, I want to be really clear about where I stand, which is that we continue to work on getting this number to 0. Based on this updated NEO data, we've also begun notifying staff whose CHRCs are expiring within the next 3-month window and asking that they renew 1 week prior, at least 1 week prior to the expiration. So everyone whose expires in October, November, December has already been notified. When we get to the end of October, we'll get to all those January folks, but we'll remind the November, December folks too if they haven't done it. And we just will continue to send out those reminders so that we are helping our employees to stay on top of it. My guess is people get reminders, but we see those things sometimes and think, oh, I have 6 months, 4 months, 2 months, or it goes into our spam. Whatever happens, we want to help the employees to be successful in getting that done so that we can be in compliance. And then in a second, I'm going to ask to go to the next slide just to also share with you that with the HR generalists, we've been working on a new checklist. And this is something that we've talked about and reflected on a lot in terms of wanting to make sure we have a better and more comprehensive way to ensure that all of the aspects of our onboarding, that nothing's being overlooked. And so with monthly reviews, we can double check that we can catch any errors or anything that gets missed. But the goal is just to get it in right the first time to get to 0 errors. And so that's our goal. And if we can just look at the next slide. On the first slide here, you can see this is a bit of one of the spreadsheet forms they've been using to collect information about new hires and transfers. And you can probably see this is older data. This is more of May through August. And when we get to the next slide, you'll see a little bit more data as new employees are being onboarded. But this is the beginning of what they collect. I blacked out people's names, obviously, but they collect the location, kind of what is happening. Is it a transfer? Is it a new hire? What kinds of updates they've made, if they've made that offer. And then we've got some gaps you can see in status. So we've had conversations around, is that important data to be collecting? And if so, we want to make sure we're filling in that section of the spreadsheet. And then on the next slide, you can see the first several columns have also been there for a while in terms of how they're tracking. So looking at whether these employees would need to attend the new hire orientation. So if it's like, for example, some of those first people were transfers, they wouldn't need to go to that. Has it been entered into NEO, into Frontline? Has our IT department been notified so they can create an email address? Has the employee been entered into ADP? Have they been sent over to benefits so that they can get signed up for all of their benefits? So all of those things are there. And we've recently added these fields, right? So if you look at the next 4 fields or the next 5 fields, CHRC status, CHRC expiration date, certifications and clearances, expiration dates, and ready to start with a big exclamation point, because I feel really excited about getting to that finish line. We've added those there. And we really want to add that because one of the biggest questions we get from our site and department leads is, when can that person start? And sometimes, we can work on our timelines in HR for sure. And then sometimes it's because the employee doesn't have a CHRC yet, or they haven't had their pre-employment physical yet. And so ultimately, our goal would be to share this with our site and department leaders. We're going to get ourselves to be comfortable and a little more acclimated with using and collecting more data. But the goal would be to be able to share this with our hiring managers so that when they're wondering, like, what's happening with John Smith that I hired and I haven't heard anything, they can go on and see, oh, they still don't have a CHRC, and that's why they haven't been able to start with me yet. And then we'll ideally be able to make that last box, check it off, mark it green, so that we know everything has been done. And there's a few exceptions, but there shouldn't be many. The reason I picked this particular section of the spreadsheet is because you can see that one red box in NEO, right? And that would be one exception where we would potentially actually want, if everything was in place, the CHRC and everything else, we would probably let that employee start. Because that's an example where an employee worked for a different school district in Maine, and that school district hasn't gone through and updated their NEO file yet to remove that person. And so we can't add them into our NEO file. So if we know that, I don't want to call out any other districts, but if we know that another district nearby employed this person last school year, and we've spoken to their HR department and they've said, oh yeah, we just have to exit them from NEO, we can feel pretty confident if we have the rest of the paperwork that might be an exception that we would make, but we leave it there in red so that we can keep following up which we do have a couple out there like that we are still following up with those prior districts of employment to ask them to release that person, because we want our data to be correct when we submit to the state. And we don't want theirs to be wrong either, right? When they submit to the state, they've got an employee in there that doesn't work for them anymore. So I was curious about that one box being red, and I figured you might be too. So with all of that, I will say this is sort of our newest work in progress. We're working through this to sort of see and hope that this helps us to better monitor our data. I've already seen something else, another column. I've already decided about another column I want to add to this to help consolidate some of our data collection in HR. But for now, we're going to start working, or we started working with this as a little bit more comprehensive data gathering for ourselves. The only other thing I would point out is there's a lot of stuff you don't see on this checklist, like did you collect the W-9s or the I-9s and the W-2s and all those things? That's because a lot of that documentation, when they onboard an employee, they can't move through ADP without putting that information in, right? And so if they don't have what they need with social security number or whatever, right? If they're missing data, ADP is not going to let them save that person into the system and keep moving through. The CHRC certifications and CHRC and things, we do have those. Helene and Ryan and I were actually just talking on Friday. We do have access to those as optional fields, and we can start utilizing those by entering this data in. That's a project to go back 1,600 employees worth and go back and enter that data, but we can enter that data in. But because they're optional fields, if it gets missed, it won't sort of trigger an alert, right? That says you missed a field and you can't save this person's report. It would still allow us to save that person's report without that data. So we have to have some other way to be monitoring it. So between this checklist, monthly reports, comparing NEO to make sure we've gotten everybody in who's in ADP and on our staffing spreadsheet, running those CHRC violations, goal zero on all of that. So I feel positively that we're on the right path to getting there. And I can take any questions you may have. I'm sorry, I talked a lot and fast.
Oh, it's great. It's great. A lot of good information, very efficiently communicated and clearly communicated. So I really appreciate that. Let's see. I am not seeing any Zoom hands right now. But I do have, I have some questions. So let's start there. So I had written down on the NEO slide, Board Chair Lentz, go ahead.
I had to step away for a second, so you may have covered this, but just wanted to, there's the certification violations. That's what I was curious about. Never mind. I'm just going to go back and read the slide.
Well, and you don't have to. I did say I would try to provide more of that at the November board meeting because the final report's due October 31st, and we're still cleaning up some of those violations just to make sure it's accurate.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Of course.
And the 41 current is obviously the goal is 0. We're going to get there, but it's like that's down from a higher number before, correct?
Yeah, I mean, what it really represents, because I think when I presented to you guys in August, right, those people aren't the 41, right? Those people have done what they need to do and they've gotten their CHRCs. The 41 is really coming out of a couple of pockets. In large part, it's this 150 employees that we were like, why weren't they entered in NEO? We're not sure, but we've put them in now, right? Mm-hmm. And the result of that is our data is better. And we found that these people, we need to make sure to work with them to get their CHRCs done or to be renewed, right? A lot of them are renewals. And then a handful of the people are new staff, as I was sort of explaining, like a new teacher who we've said, yes, they've gotten their letter from the state saying you're eligible for a conditional certification. It's in the system that we're just waiting for DOE to finalize the processing of that conditional certification. But their fingerprinting lives with that certification. Mm-hmm. So like I said, we've sort of asked, if you don't mind, just do your CHRC too separately, because we don't know how long that certification is going to take DOE. And we would like that peace of mind of knowing that we've got that CHRC. So, that handful of teachers that are new hires have been applying for those CHRCs now.
Super. Out of curiosity, so you were talking about the NEO system. It sounded like each employee can only be in there once. Like if a teacher moves from district to district, they have to get out of the first one. What happens if there's like a teacher who teaches in one district and coaches in another district?
That's a great question. I don't know. We haven't had that be a problem. But there are different categorizations. So I suppose I can ask the team if they've come across anything like that.
It was more just like, I wonder.
Yeah, for sure. And because we can put in, so we do have staff who get like a coaching stipend, and we have to enter that in as part of their assignment too. So, but it's a different part of the drop-down menu.
Sure. Okay. So back on the first slide that you were talking to, I had made a note, so that very first line, the staffing spreadsheet, ADP and NEO basically being three different things, right? And the question that I was going to ask was, what's the staffing spreadsheet? It's the screenshots from the other slides, correct? Is that what the staffing spreadsheet? I'm glad I asked.
Yeah. So this is helpful for me because I know when I got here, the fiscal year 2025 staffing spreadsheet was actually like my first go-to try to figure out what our staffing looks like at all of our sites. Okay. So actually the finance department had generated a fiscal year 2025 staffing spreadsheet that breaks down our staffing by location or department. And it lists everybody who's employed except for like separate coaches, right? But all of our teachers, administrators, ed techs, support staff, they're all on this. And so if someone, the reason or the rationale for it, for me, where it's really helpful is if someone were to resign their position, that would get the color would be changed on that spreadsheet so that that's brought to our attention. Usually there's a number put next to it because we've got another like a requisition for hire out there that's going to be attached to this little number. And then we're going to hire and that's going to be replaced. So you might see an elementary school with, say, 30 teachers on that list.
Yeah. Part of the reason why I made a note specifically about that is I'm hoping to, and we don't have to spend a ton of time on this, but the thought in my head was it sounded like three different things, three different buckets of information with possibly some duplication, NEO, ADP, and this staffing spreadsheet. And I'm curious whether, is the fiscal year 25 staffing spreadsheet serving purposes that cannot be served by ADP or by NEO?
I would say it is. I see Helene shaking her head too. I would say it is for me, if I'm curious about something at a specific site, I'm gonna go to that and I'm gonna find that tab that says whatever East End, and I'm gonna find that tab and I'm gonna find what I'm looking for in terms of our staffing.
Yeah.
ADP. So that's going to have it isolated. Not that we can generate reports, but it's done, right? It's there. It's at my fingertips. I can go to it. ADP has a lot of our employee data that wouldn't be like that. Staffing spreadsheet is really just, school grade level name. ADP has obviously all that personal information. It's the payroll system, right? That is really necessary for HR and for finance to have all of that for our employees. And then NEO is strictly that state reporting, and it's identifiable information around those certifications. I think if what you're asking, I don't know that they generate all the same information. They certainly don't provide all the same information.
Yeah, Can I
explain? So the staffing spreadsheet is really more for allocations. It's in order to make sure that we don't overfill a school site or a department. It's to keep track of how many positions we have and how many positions need to be filled. On the front end, what happens is as soon as we get a copy from HR in regards to a termination, it gives the generalist and everyone the ability to understand that there's one person leaving that position, and then now we have a vacancy that needs to be filling that position. ADP doesn't have a way to ensure that for position control to ensure that we don't overfill. Like a school, say they're supposed to have 15 teachers, it wouldn't stop us to fill it with 20 teachers.
Yep.
So this is our stopgap for right now. We in the budget to work on getting a module to include a position control, which would include some of the front end things that would help Jennifer also with onboarding and recruitment. So that's something that she and I will eventually this year take on as well.
That's helpful, because whenever I hear like, oh, there's the same information in a couple of different places, it's like, oh my gosh, hopefully everybody's remembering to update all the different locations and all that, which I'm sure is in an SOP, or something like that. So that's why I was asking about that. So I appreciate that context. And then my last question about the information that you shared, Jennifer, has to do with the so you were talking about the CHRC reminder process, where 3 months, 3 month chunks, sending reminders to staff to let them know you're going to need to renew. I'm curious about whether building leaders also get that data so that they can be part of the solution.
Yeah, so the building or department admin, depending, building department admin are copied on that communication, as are the generalists that are assigned to that department or that location, so that we've got multiple sets of eyes that are on the lookout for that.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? Board Member Opperman, go ahead.
Not a question, just an expression of appreciation to both Helene and to Jennifer, because this has been a heavy lift. It is so cleaned up and understandable, and I see us moving forward solidly, and I can't thank you enough.
Hear, hear. All right, other questions, comments, additions? All right. I am not seeing any. I believe that was the end of our agenda, correct? All right, wonderful. Last call for questions, comments, or concerns. All right, I'm not seeing any, so I would look for a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Board Member Opperman, and a second from Board Member Figdor. Wonderful, thank you so much. So we are adjourned at 6:54 p.m. Thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your night.